who will meet Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene in Washington, said on Friday he was encouraged by the South African Treasury's commitment to bring a more strategic focus on public spending. Kim says a global infrastructure facility established last year to bring together private sector investors with huge amounts of capital and countries with a bankable infrastructure development project is bearing fruit. Well, Chief Economist at Efficient Group, Dawie Rood, joins me now from Pretoria for more on the significance of these meetings that's happening this week. Dawie, good afternoon. Well, exactly how significant is this World Bank IMF meeting for South Africa? What are the stakes here for the country?
Well, the reality is that they meet quite often. They get together in Washington this time around. I've attended some of those meetings, and I can tell you it's mostly a bit of a talk shop. Let's be honest about this. There's a lot of politics behind the scene as well. But still, this is the most important financial players in the world getting together. The G7 will be there, the G20 will be there, most of the world's, or many of the world's financial ministers of finance will be there, and governors of central banks will be there. So that's certainly a place to be seen at least. And I think there may be one or two answers to one or two decisions taken there. Usually that is not the case. Usually we don't expect some breakthrough somewhere, but it's a nice platform where economists at least can rub shoulders.
But Dawie, I guess for South Africa, I mean, it's all about moving more visibly to infrastructure investment rather than consumption. It's been often spoken about. We see it with the current finance minister, with the previous one. But are we seeing those investment changes on the ground?
I'm afraid not really yet. The South African economy suffers from a number of deficits. Now, economists usually talk about deficits like, for example, the current account deficit, or we talk about the fiscal deficit, or we even talk about the educational deficit in South Africa. But there are a number of other deficits in the South African economy as well. Remember, you can only grow an economy if you save and use this savings to invest in order to grow your economy in future. So the real problem actually starts with savings. And I'm afraid we're not doing very well as far as savings are concerned in South Africa. Now, there are three possible savers. The one is the private sector or households. And households are, well, not really saving. Very few individuals can retire financially independent. The only real big savers are companies, and they are providing the bulk of savings in South Africa. And the third possible saver is government themselves. I'm afraid government is a huge dissaver. Government borrows long-term money to spend on short-term current expenditure, and essentially government is destroying savings. So if you don't have sufficient savings, then it's very difficult to invest. And that is where institutions like the World Bank and of course foreign investors are very important, because we are very dependent on that capital flowing into South Africa, and to put this money not to consumption expenditure, but to actually build stuff with that, to build power stations and infrastructure and the like with that. We've got a huge shortage with that, and unfortunately I think we've left it for far too long, as the electricity shortage, I think, is proof of that.
Now, Dawie, as this delegation heads off to Washington for this World Bank IMF meeting, South Africa will also be watching this Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. So I guess the hope is that the bank will be able to kickstart growth on the Asian continent and then once again spur a growing demand for our commodities. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to, first of all, understand a little bit about the politics behind this as well. The two major financial institutions globally is, of course, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank themselves. And they go back to the so-called Bretton Woods Agreement. The emerging economies, including South Africa, have been quite unhappy about getting proper representation for the emerging economies from those two institutions. It hasn't really happened. And what we've seen subsequently is a number of new emerging economy institutions coming to the fore, like, for example, the proposal of a new Asian investment bank coming from China. Now, the Americans are not too happy about that. I don't really understand why. I think the only reason I can think of is that they could lose some political clout. But the British are quite happy about that. I suspect that South Africa is quite happy about that. And then, of course, the Asian countries as well. Remember, the Chinese got massive amounts of reserves. So obviously, they will provide the bulk of funding to this new proposed bank. Interesting is that the World Bank actually said that they would like to work together with this proposed bank. In fact, they also said they would like to work together with the BRICS Bank that was created not too long ago. And it will be interesting to see what's going to happen eventually about that. I think it can potentially give quite a substantial injection, a capital injection, especially in the smaller economies in the East. I'm referring to economies like Myanmar, maybe, or Vietnam, and those sort of places are certainly in need of some extra capital injection.
I was reading this morning that there is some concern about China's power over this institution. What's your take on it?
Well, we are concerned about that as South Africans as well. There were some comments from local analysts saying that we should be concerned about China's dominant position in the BRICS Development Bank. I'm not too concerned about that. The reality is that the Chinese economy, depending on what measure you use, is the biggest or the second biggest economy in the world. They have a lot of cash available. We are in need of cash, and many other countries are in need of funds as well. So why not make use of that? See it rather as an opportunity and not as a threat. Everybody was very concerned about the Japanese in the 1970s and 80s. The Chinese economy doing very well now, but that's also not going to go on forever, and there will be a new champion in a couple of decades' time again. In the meantime, we as South Africans and other developing economies make use of this opportunity to start doing business with one of the giants in the world.
All right, Chief Economist at Efficient Group, Davi Rowe, thanks indeed for your time.